The airplane cabin was filled with murmurs, but a single slap cut through the air like a knife. The flight attendant stood over her, face flushed with the anger of assumed authority. The woman, silent, unmoved, looked up calmly, her eyes meeting the attendant's with an intensity that sent a ripple of unease through the room. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Passengers looked away, uncomfortable. They didn't understand what had just happened, but they could feel the weight of it. Her hand never moved, but her presence, dignified, quiet, filled the space, louder than any words. She was no ordinary passenger. She always thought she was just like everyone else, a woman on a business trip, trying to escape the demands of the world. But there was something different about her, something others could never quite put their finger on. As the flight attendant stormed over, her face reddened in anger, expecting a compliant, fearful passenger. Instead, she found someone who stood with an unspoken power. The woman, whose name was Tara, sat quietly, her posture poised, though her eyes betrayed something deeper. The kind of calm that came only with experience. Tara was used to the world misunderstanding her, seeing only the surface, assuming the worst of her silence. She was a woman who had learned to play the role of the quiet observer in a society that demanded noise. The flight attendant, on the other hand, was brash. Her uniform was pristine, her actions sharp. Lana, young and eager, carried an air of entitlement with her. She believed herself to be in control, always the one to call the shots. People around her followed her cues without question. But as she approached Tara, she miscalculated. Tara's presence alone began to shift the room's energy. Lana's condescending tone hung in the air, but Tara didn't flinch. No outburst, no anger. She simply met Lana's eyes with a quiet force, a woman who had faced far worse, who carried within her the weight of years of wisdom and resilience. But what Lana didn't know was that Tara wasn't just any businesswoman. She owned the airline. The moment Lana raised her hand, the room seemed to freeze. The other passengers, unaware of who Tara truly was, only saw a disagreement escalating. Lana's voice, sharp and demanding, echoed in the otherwise silent cabin. "I said, sit down and buckle up," she commanded, her hand now firmly gripping Tara's arm. But Tara didn't move. She simply sat, her eyes unwavering, a silent defiance against the growing tide of injustice. Is this how we treat people? Tara wondered, her mind racing with memories of times she had been belittled, overlooked, and disregarded. As a black woman, she had spent her life confronting these moments, and yet here she was again, facing it in the most unexpected place. The passengers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the two women. Some whispered, others looked away, unwilling to get involved in what seemed to be a petty dispute. But what they didn't know was that this was far more than a disagreement. It was a test of power, a test of how long one could endure before the silence broke. Lana's grip tightened. "Don't make me call security," she threatened, her voice rising, the tension in the air palpable. Tara could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, but she refused to give in to the humiliation. She remained calm, her heart pounding with the weight of every moment she had spent learning to endure this type of injustice. The flight attendant's voice rang out like a whip, her words cutting through the air with venom. "I told you once. Now sit down." The anger was unmistakable, but so was the misjudgment. Lana had no idea who Tara was. The room, despite its tension, was eerily quiet. Tara's mind flashed back to her younger days, the countless times she had been overlooked, the moments when people assumed her silence was weakness. And then the realization hit her. No one ever listened until it was too late. Lana, blinded by her perceived authority, was caught in her own trap. She couldn't see the woman she was confronting. Tara wasn't some powerless, angry passenger. She was someone who had earned her place in this world through blood, sweat, and resilience. But none of that mattered in this moment. What mattered was how people perceived her, how the world loved to pigeonhole her into a narrative of subservience. The injustice stung deeply, but Tara remained silent, her eyes fixed on the flight attendant. The slap came without warning, a sharp sting against her cheek. The sound echoed in the small cabin. Gasps rippled through the room, but still no one stepped in. Lana's face twisted with confusion as she quickly realized the gravity of what she had done. But it was too late. The damage was already done. The world she had tried to create, one where her authority went unchallenged, crumbled with a single, unthinking act. Tara's cheek burned, but her heart was calm. She didn't need to react with violence. Her power didn't lie in loud outbursts. It lay in quiet strength. And in that moment, Tara knew this would be the moment that changed everything. The moment Tara felt the sting of the slap, time seemed to slow. She could feel the heat of the slap on her cheek, but what she felt more was the chill of realization. This was not just about her. The air in the cabin thickened. The whispers began to grow louder, but it was the silence of the flight attendant that struck Tara most. Lana was standing frozen, her hands still raised, but her eyes betrayed her panic. She had acted impulsively in a moment of power that she assumed was absolute. And yet, in that very moment, she had done the unthinkable. She had underestimated the woman in front of her. Tara closed her eyes for just a second. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation settle in. She doesn't know who I am, Tara thought, but she will. The flight attendant, still standing, seemed lost in the realization of what she had just done. Tara's silence was a wall, and as she sat there, unmoving, the others around her began to notice. This was no ordinary passenger. For a moment, a strange calm washed over Tara. It wasn't fear or sadness, it was clarity. She remembered a time in her life when she had faced much worse than this. She remembered the subtle insults, the microaggressions, the systemic obstacles she had had to climb every single day. But she had always risen, quietly, silently, like the ocean's tide that cannot be stopped. She had built this empire, this airline, from the ground up. It was her vision, her hard work, her countless sacrifices, and no one was going to take that from her. Least of all a young flight attendant who had no idea what kind of woman she was dealing with. Tara knew there was power in stillness, in patience. The world had always underestimated her. Her silence, once perceived as weakness, was now her greatest strength. She had spent years learning how to silence the noise of the world around her, the judgments, the labels, the assumptions. And now, that silence would be her weapon. The truth of who she was would rise to the surface, and nothing could stop it. But how to reveal it? How to make Lana, and everyone else, see the truth without uttering a word? Tara's hand, which had been resting on her lap, slowly rose to her cheek, gently caressing the place where Lana's slap had landed. She didn't flinch, she didn't cry, but she allowed herself that brief moment of connection to the pain. It wasn't for sympathy, it was a reminder. The world had tried to break her before, and it hadn't succeeded. This slap, this small act of cruelty, would not break her either. The passengers around her continued to look on, unsure of what to do, but then, one by one, their gazes began to shift. They could see the strength in her stillness, in the quiet way she held herself. There was something regal about her, a subtle grace that began to shift the energy of the room. Lana, meanwhile, was lost. She had been sure of her power, sure that Tara would cower or fight back. But the silence that followed her slap confused her. Tara wasn't even looking at her. She wasn't giving her the reaction she expected. In that moment, something changed. Tara stood up, the shift in her posture immediately noticeable. It was as if the entire cabin held its breath. Lana took a small step back, unsure of what to do next. Tara didn't need to say anything. Her mere presence spoke volumes. She walked slowly to the front of the cabin, ignoring the still shocked passengers. As she passed Lana, she leaned in, her voice quiet but firm, like the calm before a storm. "I suggest you think carefully before you make another mistake." And with that, Tara walked to the cockpit and took a seat in the first-class section, her every step a reminder of the power that had always been inside her, waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. She wasn't done yet. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted. What had started as a quiet moment of tension now felt like the calm before a storm. Tara sat in the first-class section, the world around her seeming to dim as she focused on the subtle transformations taking place within her. She knew she had been underestimated. The flight attendants continued their rounds, but Lana's movements were stiff. She was visibly uncomfortable, her eyes darting toward Tara's seat as if she had committed a grave sin and feared the consequences. But it wasn't just Lana who had felt the sting of Tara's silence. The entire cabin had. Tara's mind was clear now, her thoughts focused. It was time. She didn't need to stand up and shout. She didn't need to raise her voice. The truth would come to her when the time was right. She knew that the first step to true power was understanding the timing. Tara watched as Lana moved toward the cockpit with another flight attendant, her footsteps echoing down the aisle. She had no idea that her own destiny was about to be completely turned upside down. She was still playing the role of a servant, ignorant of the woman she had just struck. A moment later, a soft voice called out from the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing some slight turbulence ahead, so please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The announcement was normal, but Tara's senses sharpened. She noticed that something in the air had changed. A soft murmur rose from the other passengers, as if they, too, were awaiting the next act in this unfolding drama. Tara slowly stood from her seat, walking toward the front of the cabin. She didn't need to look at anyone else. Her presence was enough to command attention. As she reached the front, her voice was calm, but everyone in the cabin could feel the weight behind her words. "I believe it's time for a little truth." Lana stopped in her tracks, her back stiffening as she turned to face Tara. The other flight attendants glanced at one another, unsure of what to expect. Tara continued, her eyes locked on Lana's. "You slapped me, not knowing who I was. You humiliated me, thinking you were in control. What you didn't realize is that I am the one who built this airline. You think you know power, but you only know what you've been told. I'm not just a passenger." Lana's face drained of color. She was about to say something, but Tara raised a hand, silencing her with a single motion. "You see, Lana," Tara continued, "this airline, this empire, it's mine. I've been sitting quietly, watching you play your little games, and I let it happen because I believe that eventually people like you would reveal themselves. And now, here we are." The crowd began to murmur, their collective realization dawning. Tara was no ordinary woman. She wasn't just some upset traveler who had been wronged. She was the very foundation of what they had taken for granted. She was the reason they were all there. The air felt electric now, the power dynamics of the entire situation shifting. Tara was no longer a victim. She was the embodiment of strength. Tara's voice grew even calmer, but there was a weight to every word she spoke. "I have the power to take this airline down with a single call, but I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for justice. I want you to understand that silence, the silence you thought was weakness, was never that. It was preparation." Lana stood frozen, her eyes wide, searching for the words to defend herself. But there was nothing she could say. She had slapped the woman who was not just a passenger, but the very reason the airline existed. She had slapped the very woman who had the power to ruin everything in an instant. Tara didn't wait for an apology. She didn't need it. Instead, she reached in her purse and pulled out a small envelope, handing it to Lana. "Inside this envelope," Tara said, her voice steady, "is proof of my ownership of this airline. I have been the one calling the shots from behind the scenes, and now I will be the one to decide if you stay or if you go." Lana hesitated, her hand trembling as she took the envelope. The silence was deafening as she opened it, the papers inside revealing the truth of Tara's words. The passengers were stunned, watching in awe as the woman they had underestimated completely turned the situation around. Tara wasn't just the hero of her own story. She was now the embodiment of everything they had been blind to. With one final glance at Lana, Tara turned and made her way back to the first-class cabin, her steps slow but purposeful. She had proven her point. The power had shifted, and she was the one who held the cards now. The flight attendants, passengers, and even Lana stood still, processing the truth. No one had expected this twist. But Tara wasn't interested in what they expected. She was interested in justice, and she had just delivered it. Tara's calm demeanor radiated like a quiet storm. She had said everything she needed to say in the cabin, but the power of her words echoed beyond the confines of the plane. Now, as she walked away, she knew her silence was just as potent as her revelations. The truth had been spoken, and now, everyone knew where the power lay. Tara, you thought my silence was my weakness. It wasn't. It was my weapon. The phrase lingered like smoke in the air, a reminder that true power doesn't always scream to be heard. Sometimes, it is the quietest moments that burn the brightest. Tara, you slapped me thinking I'd break. But I didn't. I rose. There was an unspoken energy in Tara's voice. No anger, no hatred, just pure truth. She didn't need to respond with violence. She responded with the strongest thing she could have, her inner strength. Tara, you wear power like it's a crown. I wear it like it's my birthright. It was the kind of statement that made the room pause. No one had expected this calm woman to hold so much power. But Tara wasn't just any woman. She was a force that couldn't be denied. Tara, the greatest form of revenge? Living well. I've mastered that. With each step she took, Tara walked away from the chaos she had caused, a symbol of triumph. No need for revenge. Her life was a testament to everything Lana would never understand. Tara, I didn't come here to fight you. I came here to show you who I truly am. The simplicity of this line resonated deeply with those who were listening. Sometimes the most profound truths come without fanfare. They came with clarity and self-awareness. Tara, you wanted control, but control is just an illusion. I've always had it. It was a striking declaration of independence, one that would leave anyone who heard it reconsidering their own definition of power. Control was something everyone sought, but Tara had always known it was hers to wield. Tara, it was never about the slap. It was about the lesson you're about to learn. Tara wasn't angry, nor was she bitter. Her words were calm, measured, but each one carried weight. The slap had been the catalyst, but the true impact would come with the understanding that followed. Tara, you've underestimated me, and that is your biggest mistake. The subtle power in her words was undeniable. Tara didn't need to shout to be heard. Her strength spoke louder than any noise. Tara, you thought I was nothing, but I'm everything you'll never be. There was a deep and poetic cruelty in this line, a reminder that those who looked down on her would forever be haunted by the truth of her unshakable strength. Tara, you thought I was broken, but I was just gathering pieces to rebuild. Her voice was soft, but there was an underlying fierceness to her words. She wasn't a victim. She was a warrior, and she would rise, no matter the adversity. Each of these lines, spoken calmly, rang through the cabin like a bell tolling in the distance. The truth was powerful, and with each word, Tara not only claimed her place in this story, but also ensured the lesson would be felt long after the flight ended. As the flight neared its end, the turbulent energy that once filled the cabin had quieted, replaced by an uneasy silence. Tara stood at the back, her posture still unwavering, as the murmurs of the other passengers began to quieten. In the distance, Lana sat, her head lowered in defeat, her mask of superiority now slipping away. Tara had already walked through the doors to reclaim her rightful place, not just as an airline owner, but as someone who had been underestimated far too long. The final call came, and as Tara moved down the aisle, she noticed a familiar face, a young woman who had witnessed everything. The young woman looked at her with new eyes, a look of respect that hadn't been there earlier. She had watched the strength Tara had exuded and recognized that she wasn't just a passenger on this flight. She was the queen of the skies. Tara didn't need any grand gestures. Her presence had already spoken volumes. As she reached the front of the plane to exit, the crew was in silence. The captain, a man who had always kept his distance, met her eyes for the first time with a sense of awe. In that single exchange of looks, Tara knew something had shifted. They knew now. She was no longer just an observer in her own life. She was the one everyone would be watching from now on. And then came the final moment, a subtle, yet powerful echo of the past. The way the flight attendant had once looked at her, eyes full of arrogance and assumptions, now transformed into something else. Tara caught her gaze for a second before walking away, and it was in that brief exchange that the tables had fully turned. There was no need for words. The crowd that once sided with the oppressor was now silent. Those who had questioned her, who had belittled her, now looked away with regret. Tara didn't need to say anything. Her journey, her transformation, her revelation, had all spoken louder than any words could. Tara stepped off the plane, the sound of her heels echoing through the terminal as she walked away from the chaos behind her. There were no cheers, no applause, just a profound silence that spoke louder than any celebration. She didn't need a crowd to validate her. Her actions had already done the work. As the doors closed behind her, she paused for just a moment, glancing back at the plane. The fight had been hard. The battle was intense. But in the stillness of her departure, Tara understood that true power wasn't about loud victories or grand gestures. It was about walking away knowing that the war had already been won. Her smile was small, but it was a symbol of everything she had overcome. The world may have underestimated her, but she had always known her worth. And in this final moment, she knew her peace had been earned.